Hi there, and welcome once again to the Joe Roberts podcast. The title today is Southport Incident, the Real Issue. There are a number of issues as regards the aftermath of what occurred in Southport on the 29th of July, which I want to talk about in my podcast. And first off, I'll speak briefly about the incident itself. It goes without saying that it's horrific beyond belief and is absolutely unfathomable that a human being could do that to other human beings. However, in the aftermath of it, some things have happened which are really not helping the issue, and in actual fact are fanning the flames of the whole thing. So, in the aftermath of that, a number of far right individuals in the UK began trying to put an angle on this as regards immigration, and very quickly riots developed across the UK in response to this incident because obviously most of the victims involved in the attacks in Southport were children, and three of them later died. So, some far right extremists, rather a lot of them, tried to put a spin on the story and tried to make it about immigration. And as I'm sure a lot of people have come to understand, it's not about that at all. Firstly, the perpetrator of the attack was not an immigrant. They had been born and raised in this country, and there were also claims that were made that this person was a Muslim, and that turned out to be untrue as well, and the person was actually a Christian. However, I think it's become increasingly obvious that the chaos that has ensued in the aftermath of these horrific crimes has been highly orchestrated and has also been just an excuse. It's like a widespread sort of industrial scale psychological projection. So basically, what has occurred is they have used these admittedly horrific crimes as an excuse to basically flood the streets of Britain with hate and violence and destruction. And I think any reasonable human being who's of sound mind can see that. However, there's a few other issues and questions which I think need to be asked in the aftermath of this. And unfortunately, what has happened now is that these riots and the false narratives that go alongside them have obfuscated the real issue, and I would like to talk about the real issue. So, the real issue is a mass murder of a very particular kind, and it's not unique. So, this is not the first crime of its kind. In Britain and Europe, and occasionally elsewhere in the world, over the past sort of 30 years or so, this type of crime has unfortunately cropped up every so often where a young male, because it is usually a young male, commits mass murder, and usually it's against young people, teenagers, or sometimes even children. Now, there's been a few of these crimes. America holds the highest number of them, but what they all tend to have in common, well, I've done a bit of research and I've come up with the commonalities, and I'd like to go through some of them because there is an issue here and people do need to be asking serious questions, and I think we as a society do need to be coming up with some answers, or at least trying to find solutions to this. So I did a bit of research, and it didn't take me long to come up with the answers. Over 90% of perpetrators of these types of crime are young men aged between 15 to 25. Over 60% of them had moderate to severe mental health issues, including a wide variety of things ranging from depression, anxiety, autism, ADHD, or personality disorders. I think if we're being completely honest here, though, the figure is not 60%, it's 100%, because by its very nature, you have to have mental health problems in order to commit a crime like this in the first place. Over 80% of them experienced social isolation and or bullying, and a large percentage of them were emotionally, how can we say this, emotionally challenged. So Emotional isolation in men is one of the key issues here, and I think if you want to get right to the heart of the matter, there's a sort of even more key issue, and it's lack of visibility. It's something along the lines of emotional invisibility and a desire to be seen, and that kind of points towards, I would say, why they choose the particularly horrific type of crime that they do, because it's guaranteed to get them maximum attention, and they're in a kind of psychological mindset whereby they don't care if it's negative attention, and they don't even care if it's the most negative kind of attention that a human being could possibly have. So the key issue in all of this, which these mind-numbingly pointless, idiotic, thuggish riots have obfuscated, is that there is a growing problem amongst young men in a particular age group, which every so often comes to the surface in the most horrific ways imaginable. Now, before I go any further, I can almost imagine some people thinking in response to what I'm saying, but not all young men with emotional problems, or not all young men with mental health problems commit these violent type of crimes, and that's correct. And that doesn't mean that this isn't an issue. I'm going to explain a little bit more about that. So there's an issue in general when it comes to men in our society and emotions. So generally speaking, women are expected to be the more emotional sex, and it's generally more accepted for women to be emotional. There is a culture of emotional suppression in our society as regards men, and they're not encouraged to be emotional, and they generally tend to suppress their emotions more than women do, and they're generally expected to do so. As regards the idea that not all men respond to mental health problems or emotional invisibility by committing serious crimes, that is true. However, we have it's important to have an understanding here of the collective consciousness and the collective unconscious. So those are terms that I think I would encourage as many people as possible to research and understand. You have a collective unconscious, and when an entire gender, i.e. men, are expected to be more strong, more stoic, and less emotional than they actually are, and all of that's getting suppressed into the collective unconscious. Every so often it has to find its way to the surface, and I'm guessing that these sort of school shooter, mass murderer types are one expression of that, because there is no disputing this. The overwhelming majority of these types of killers are young men, and just by coincidence, the highest prevalence of mental health problems and suicidal ideation in our society exists in young men in that specific age group. So there is an issue here. Yes, not all young men are mass murderers. However, it's like a mechanism. It's all of this pent-up emotional energy that's going into the collective unconscious has to find an outlet every so often, and it's finding an outlet through particular individuals, and it's making its way to the surface through particular individuals who are committing these heinous and horrific crimes. So I'm very sad to see that these riots have occurred, because they're masking the real issue, which is this specific type of crime. It's not an ordinary everyday kind of crime. It's a very specific type of crime because it's very strategic. It's not an accident that these types of killers usually choose children and young people. They are purposefully doing that because it's about maximum effect. It's about being seen. These people have a psychology of being unseen. In this most recent one, it was said, and it isn't really commented upon by anybody to any great degree, that this young man was isolating from family. Now, who knows why that's the case? Who knows what the background is? Who knows what the circumstances are? But there is a common denominator amongst these crimes. It's usually young men. It's usually young men with mental health problems, a wide variety of them. And it's usually isolation that is the sort of deciding factor in motivating these types of crimes. These people are dangerously isolated emotionally and perceptually, and they're sort of backing themselves into a corner of emotional and perceptual invisibility, and it's doing horrible things to their emotional state and their psyche, and it's what's causing these horrific crimes. And we as a society, if we could prevent these, we have a moral and collective responsibility to do so. That is the real issue. Now, whether you agree with any of what I've just said, I would say that it's more important for us as a society to be looking at this issue and trying to put our heads together and finding out why it is these crimes are happening and why it is that specific demographics keep coming up again and again where these crimes are concerned. The most important issue here is trying to prevent these kind of crimes, not a bunch of thugs creating riots in the street and totally hijacking the whole thing and making it about something other than what it actually is about. It's really very sad that it has turned out this way, because everybody's looking in one direction and it's not the direction that they should be looking in. It goes without saying that these crimes that have been committed are horrific beyond belief. That goes without saying. Everybody knows that. But nobody is focusing on the real issue here. Everybody's focus is now on these incredibly stupid riots, incredibly stupid, destructive, pointless riots, which are just adding fuel to the fire and are just making the whole situation a million times worse than it already was. And they're trying to make it about something that it isn't even about. This issue is not about immigration. If you look at the mass murderer, school shooter dynamic in America, a large number of those were not immigrants. In fact, the vast overwhelming majority were not immigrants. It's not what we should be looking at where this young guy is concerned. The guy who carried out the stabbings in Southport. That's not what we should be looking at. It's the type of crime that we should be looking at. It's the demographic, and it's the motivating factors behind and the causes of these crimes. That's what we should have been focusing on in the aftermath of this. And instead, everybody's focus is now on the absolute chaos that is being carried out on the streets of Britain unnecessarily, pointlessly, and profoundly foolishly.